Fallout 76's Skyline Valley update added a lot of new lore to the Fallout universe. From the sprawling Vault 63, one of the largest vault complexes now in Fallout, to the electrified Lost, ghoul variants with a shocking origin, as well as new characters and events which expand our understanding of Fallout as a whole. So today, we'll be diving into many of these plot points, including plenty of obscure secrets and details that you may have missed. This video is sponsored by Bethesda, who basically just asked me to make whatever video I want, highlighting the exciting new Skyline Valley update, its new region, questline, events, and more. If you haven't already, then you can join the Fallout 76 community today through my link down below. But with that, let's dive right in to uncover the story of Vault 63. Before we get to exploring the layout and nefarious purposes of Vault 63 though, as well as its insane, sparky denizens, we first have to go back to look at the life and deeds of the man behind all of this. Situated in the eye of the storm throughout this story, the now ghoulified and electrified overseer of Vault 63, Hugo Stolz. Hugo is one of the first characters we'll meet in the Skyline Valley questline, and as we'll continually find out, he's a very intriguing individual. Originally hailing from Central Europe, probably Germany, maybe Austria or Switzerland, but somewhere German-speaking anyway, Hugo was born into the already successful Stolz family business, raised by his father to ultimately take over as CEO and build the business into something even greater. All of this he ultimately did, even despite having been born blind and remaining that way throughout his entire human life. The man he grew into, despite not being able to see any room he entered, still seemingly managed to command control of it. And when Hugo puts his mind to something, it appears there's very little that can stop him achieving it. And when Hugo eventually met his wife, Cassidy, at a gala hosted by her father in New Orleans, his ability to achieve his every desire only increased. Upon meeting, the two immediately became enraptured in a discussion over the legacies they would leave behind. And Cassidy, seeing completely beyond Hugo's blindness, fell in love with the man's ambitious and determined personality, becoming his eyes, yes, but also serving to soften the more ruthless, sharp parts of Hugo's personality. Thus, the two became an inseparable power duo, constantly focused on their work, which unfortunately left little time for their daughter and only child, Audrey, who doesn't look all too happy for it in this old Stolz family portrait that we can find at Dark Hollow Manor, the huge mansion owned by Hugo, which was constructed above the central atrium of Vault 63, which is more of a vault network really, but we'll get to that. First off, we need to address Hugo's role on the Vault-Tec board of directors, a position that he secured with very little trouble due to the sheer volume of connections and influence he had in the world of business and general power. But getting on the board wasn't Hugo's ultimate goal. Pretty much anyone with enough money to invest can do that, but what Hugo wanted was to be appointed as an overseer, granted access to Vault-Tec's assets and technology to be able to construct a sprawling underground shelter equipped with technology and resources which would grant Hugo the most power in a post-war wasteland. After all, there was no point staying a powerful businessman in a world that seemed increasingly more likely to end. Thus, with a combination of Hugo's money and Cassidy's people skills, Vault 63 was finally approved for construction, with Hugo appointed as the overseer. And in the years leading up to 2077, Hugo seemingly bought up most of Shenandoah National Park, constructing a huge labyrinth of underground chambers, all interconnected by their own little metro system, with each focusing on a different avenue of science. So, let's take a look at the complete makeup and purpose of Vault 63. To begin with, Hugo first built his huge home of Dark Hollow Manor right in the center of the park and directly above the vault's central atrium. And whilst in this red haze it looks particularly gothic, it was a place to call home, I suppose, to enjoy the sun's warmth and the outdoor breeze for as long as construction took place and the world remained unnuked. But immediately, Hugo's construction project created something of a conflict with the residents of Shenandoah, namely the residents of the Dark Hollow Falls community, who were forced out of their homes situated on the construction site. On Cassidy's terminal, down in Vault 63, we can learn that a deal was reached after the pair promised the residents of Dark Hollow places underground should the nukes be launched. But when that did eventually come to pass, Hugo did not honor this agreement, denying the residents entry to the vaults and sealing them out in the harsh wasteland. The survivors were left to bitterly band together, joining one of the many wasteland cults in fact, and would hope one day for a shot at revenge. But this was merely the first of a long series of lies and broken promises upon which Vault 63 was built. A vault that, again, is more of an interconnected network of caverns consisting of at least 5 separate parts. So, let's go through the origin and various purposes of Vault 63, beginning with the original entrance that's been located in the ash heap since the start of the game in 2018. A classic vault entryway, if ever there was one, and it wouldn't be unfair to assume this is the main way to get inside Vault 63. But actually, this was all along simply a railway transit hub from which, until recently, all other regions of the vault could be traveled to via underground rail. The vault's actual hub, as it were, is right back in the center of Shenandoah National Park, directly under Dark Hollow Manor, granting Hugo and family quick access underground. We can find the vault's atrium, base of the overseer and security offices, as well as the general residences and living quarters for most, if not all, of the dwellers. This is, for all intents and purposes, the heart of Vault 63, and after the various segments become cut off from one another shortly before our arrival, it is the only part that remains safe, where Hugo continues to reside, along with the remainder of ghoulified but not lost vault dwellers. And in fact, not even the entire atrium is safe. The lower levels, comprising of some old residences and a reactor room, are more or less just overflowing with rad rats and roaches at this point. The upper atrium, of course, has more going on, with Vault 88 exercise bikes and even sporting a small, peaceful garden area, but really, for the most part, Hugo just built a huge overseer office/living quarters for he and his wife Cassidy to reside in. And fair enough, this whole operation was, after all, his idea, but it's yet another feature of Vault 63 that highlights this man's hubris, his lofty ambition to construct such a monumental vault, which in the end became the source of Vault 63's problems. Hugo just wanted too much in too little time. Which brings us to the organic sector, an equally sprawling vault complex located a ways to the east underneath the Shining Creek Caverns. Caves which are themselves quite the marvel, teeming with glowing mushrooms and a hallucinogenic gas of some kind, probably spores from said mushrooms, which cause us to hallucinate enemies and constantly be subjected to the unnerving sound of laughter. No doubt, Hugo selected this location as the hub for organics research due to the plethora of interesting organisms already found down here, including one very interesting specimen we can find in the pharmaceuticals research sector. Seriously, this whole area might as well be its own separate vault with the number of sectors it has. But anyway, in here is this strange looking creature not too dissimilar from a gulper. In fact, at first I assumed that that's what it was, but after a trusty Google lens search, I discovered it instead to be something called a Wanamingo, a creature that will, by the events of Fallout 2, apparently evolve to resemble something far more similar to a xenomorph. And on an accompanying note with this one, it's confirmed to be not nearly the full size these things grow to. Aside from that, the sector is also home to a huge human biology wing, and by the time we come along, this place is being primarily used to house Lost in these kind of stasis vats, until such a time as the remaining dwellers can develop a cure of sorts. But prior to this, we can actually learn of a deep-cut connection that Hugo Stolz had with Professor Calvert, the brain-in-a-jar scientist that the Lone Wanderer will meet 172 years later in the Point Lookout DLC of Fallout 3. In fact, back on Cassidy's terminal at the atrium, we could find an email draft the pair were going to send to Calvert, berating him for his rivalry with Desmond Lockhart. A rivalry that, again, is brought front and center in Fallout 3. It's also clear from this that Hugo has no time for these petty rivalries, and simply wants the entirety of the Vault-Tec scientific board to work together and conduct the best science that they possibly can. And so, by exploring the human biology wing further, we could see that Hugo wants to unlock the same technology Calvert was researching for himself, manufacturing an entire river of highly radioactive fluid in which to store the brains, before sealing off many into jars to conduct early experiments with immortality tech. Of course, the subsequent ghoulification of all the Vault residents would render these experiments no longer necessary, granting the immortality Hugo was clearly already seeking for himself. But, in fairness, that same fluid manufactured was then used to preserve entire bodies, in an effort to slow or reverse the effects of feralization and being lost. But we'll come back to all of that. Now, let's head south briefly to the Slumber Mill Motel, where I think I found the still sealed off entrance to the Vault's engineering section. This is mentioned across several terminals in the other sectors to exist, but it's a section we never actually go to. However, coming to this old motel and heading into a basement at the back, hidden behind a false bookshelf, is another very small vault-looking area, with an elevator that clearly descends to the lower levels, but currently with nothing to power it. Now, I'm assuming from the robo-brains and robot construction benches that this was engineering, or at any rate robotics engineering, and it would also make perfect sense to serve as the next stage of the original experiments with human brains. Hugo had figured out how to preserve them in jars, and now clearly he was experimenting with adding said jars to robo-brains, similar to what they were doing at Vault 118 in Fallout 4's Far Harbor. Alas, as of the Skyline Valley update, this remains a mysterious sector still for Vault 63, which brings us to the final, most interesting part, the meteorology sector. This time found in the northwest under the Hawksbill weather station, and actually, we can now draw a fairly straight line across all of these entrances, including the original one way up north. A line, of course, that would make sense to run a full metro through, though it does make you wonder how many more entrances or hidden areas could potentially be found under Shenandoah. We know Hugo had lofty ambitions, hell, it's the reason the vault wasn't completed on time and everybody became ghouls. So, no doubt, there's even more out there waiting to be discovered, at least in the canon of the thing. Anyway, the meteorology sector is really the key to a lot of the newer lore found in Skyline Valley. It's where we'll fight the new Storm Goliath bosses, and it's home to the weather machine that triggered the Lost and pretty much the whole Skyline Valley storyline. So, let's look first at the Storm Goliaths, the final evolution, if you will, of Stolz's brain and jar experimentations, featuring two larger brains. In fact, these machines are effectively designed to be big guardians of Vault 63, assembled at the again still unknown engineering section and deployed here atop the Hawksbill weather station. Now, this procedure will initiate in the event that the Vault ever comes under high alert. Say if we were to do something crazy, like launch a nuke into Skyline Valley, which is exactly how we trigger this event. And to do this, you can either play through the main original questline until unlocking opportunities to launch nukes, or you can just hop into one of the fights after another player in the server launches a nuke for you. It's a tough one, so you don't want to do it alone, but to be fair, at the minute, I imagine when it begins, most players in the server will be flocking to it, at least they did for me. Now, I would say this is all another genius brainchild of Hugo Stolz, but actually, by reading this maintenance terminal in the upper level of the station right outside the arena entrance, we can learn the truth. How Hugo used his chief of security, Oberlin, to steal data from the Pentagon, equipping the guy, unbeknownst to him, with a holotape which, when loaded into a Pentagon terminal, would download secret data from their archives. And this fully explains just why we haven't seen Storm Goliaths before in Fallout, as the official military project to develop them never came close to completion before the bombs dropping, leaving Hugo with his stolen designs as the only man with the means to continue and eventually finish the project. Down below, in the vault section of this place, we can get a little more lore, explaining just why the Goliaths like to quote philosophers during combat. And to be honest, I wouldn't have noticed this detail with the Goliaths if not for these logs, though that's probably because when I fought these guys, they were constantly being stunned by, I think, an entire server of people. Anyway, Jill Parker was a former Robco engineer that Hugo poached for Vault-Tec before the bombs dropped, no doubt with a huge buyout, which she believed would enable her to build a better tomorrow. What Hugo actually wanted from her arena was for his giant murderbots to spout pretentious philosophical quotes whilst doing giant murdering. Stuff like, when you gaze into the abyss also gazes into you. Or, in the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity. Clearly, this guy wants to be king at the end of the world, and I'd imagine that he had this vision of these machines crushing the degenerates that seek to attack while spouting this cultured philosophy. Now, he didn't want anything too patriotic, he merely wanted it to sound intellectual. And Jill's entries that were eventually accepted, she'd submitted more or less jokingly. Just a shame that Hugo spent so much of his time and resources on these little cherry icing aesthetic details that he missed out on getting some of the more important work done. So, when the bombs did land in 2077, none of the vault was properly insulated from exterior radiation. No doubt, many residents, anyone without the ghoul gene, would have died shortly after, whilst the rest of course turned into ghouls. And as time passed and nobody seemed to age anymore, the dwellers no doubt began to realise that they were immortal, putting a temporary end to Hugo's immortality concerns. Ironically, not getting some of the most important work done on time had worked in Vault 63's favour, or that's at least what they would have thought at first, until slowly, one by one, some of the ghouls would have begun to show signs of going feral, and so the organic sector shifted from robo-brains to reversing these terrible effects of the mind. And when Hugo's brother, then eventually his wife, possibly the only person in the world he loved, began to show these signs of going feral, Hugo made a move that changed everything. So this next section is going to get deeper into the backstory of the Lost. There will inevitably be some spoilers for the main storyline, so feel free to come back later if you haven't finished it. But continuing, the only piece of technology that seemed to show any signs of reversing feralization was another piece of kit located at the meteorology section. The Atlas program was another pre-war military project that aimed to alter atmospheric conditions in order to weaken China. In other words, it was a weather controlling weapon designed to prevent the growth of crops, trigger blizzards, and more. It was originally set to be completed by the US military in 2078, but was shut down, or rather moved, after Stolz purchased the program for himself in an attempt to sweeten his request to Vault-Tec of becoming an overseer. After all, imagine the social experiments Vault-Tec could do with a weather machine, if they ever wanted to run experiments outside. And so, the Atlas program was redeveloped at Hawksbill Weather Station, but like so much of this vault, wasn't fully completed in time for the bombs. However, localized experimentation with this machine apparently showed signs of stopping, or rather slowing, a ghoul from going feral. And in a desperate plea to keep his wife with him, in 2095, 18 years after the bombs, at 1:16 PM on a day, Hugo Stolz performed a full activation of the weather control system. Lightning coursed through the couple and then into the tunnels of Vault 63, triggering something arguably worse than feralization for many of the ghoul residents, as they became the first Lost. But for the perpetrators, if you will, this endeavor wasn't a complete failure. Cassidy's feralization came to a complete halt, though she also took on the appearance of a Lost and fell into a coma. As for Hugo, he actually gained rather than lost, and whilst his eyes had never been able to properly perceive light, he could now finally see the world, in a Daredevil-esque sense, by perceiving the fabric of the universe at an electrical level. Whilst reading and fine detail perception were still out, Hugo could now see, via the molding of electrical signals, across far greater distances than the average person. Though he theorized that for the majority of the Lost, losing their sight and replacing it with this electrical impulse perception no doubt contributed to their insanity, cutting them off from the world to feel, well, lost in an electrical cacophony. And unlike ferals, the Lost were apparently hostile even to other ghouls, wandering the tunnels of 63 screaming creepy as shit pseudo-poetry and killing anyone not lost like them. On Oberlin's terminal, we can learn that only the atrium, the most complete section of the vaults, wasn't subjected to this transformation, and after a few days of fighting, the entrances to it were locked down. In the years that followed, I would guess the Lost were pushed back further into into specific train tunnels so that the dwellers could regain access to the organics and meteorology sections, and research could continue, now into curing the lost as well as the ferals. For the next 10 years, things continued like this, with little in the ways of substantial progress towards a cure. So, in 2105, this time at 6:41 p.m. on a day, Hugo once again brought his wife to the meteorology sector, unbeknownst to the rest of the vaults, and once again activated the machine. This time, the results were a lot more physically catastrophic. A gigantic circling storm developed above Dark Hollow Manor, and seismic activity occurred across Shenandoah, blowing open several of the vault tunnels and releasing the lost to the surface. One of the vault doors was even blown far to the north, capturing the interest of dwellers from Vault 76, who would find their way south, just in time to resolve the storm cooking up in Shenandoah. But for Hugo Stolz, this activation was again seen as an absolute win. Ignoring the devastation on the surface, Cassidy was no longer comatose, but actually responsive to Hugo, more connected to him than she'd been in decades. Though, after returning to the atrium, she once again fell into a slumber. Still, this was progress in Hugo's eyes, and he reckoned with a third activation of a slightly tweaked machine, he may finally have Cassidy return to him. And so, by manipulating those around him, his daughter, his niece, and the 76 Vault Dweller, Hugo gets the machine ready for a third run. As far as he's concerned, the Lost only need a shepherd to guide them through their world of electrical impulses. And since he's been retaining his sanity by standing at the heart of these lightning strikes, he believes himself capable of fulfilling that role. And if allowed to continue, Hugo will, in a sense, achieve just that, binding those around him to his will and stripping them of their own. Pursuing this ending to the Skyline Valley questline, the likes of Cassidy, Oberlin, and others will afterwards sit, head in hand, seemingly in a state of mental torture, whilst Hugo is simply pleased with his work. And as a man who's betrayed and killed plenty on his journey to power, who's disregarded the desires of everyone else in place of his own, with Vault 63 being his kingdom at the end of the world, it's no wonder that Hugo sees this as a favourable outcome. And as abhorrent as Hugo's eventual methods are in curing feralization, you've got to admit there is some modicum of reckless sense behind it. The Lost aren't, after all, getting found anytime soon, and the only specimen who seems to have emerged favourably from this is Hugo. But that said, I don't think activating the machine over and over again to untold wanton destruction is necessarily a sensible way to go about solving this. The ghouls may not have forever due to feralization, but they've got longer than most, and running tests more patiently will hopefully be able to yield a less destructive, more free will retaining solution further down the line. Something Hugo, it seems, will never understand. But for now, the lost ghouls of Vault 63 and Shenandoah are unfortunately exactly that, though perhaps one day we'll be able to find a more peaceful solution to their condition. For now, you'll simply have to face them down as just a much more creepy and sometimes explosive ghoul variant as you explore Shenandoah in the new Skyline Valley update. And that's not all there is to find in this new region either. There's also the likes of Mothman cultists, a camp of indoctrinated communists, which is quite hilarious, and plenty more. Again, if you haven't already, then you can join the Fallout 76 community today through my link down below to experience Skyline Valley for yourself, as well as whatever exciting future updates Fallout 76 has in store. And of course, as always, huge thank you goes to the patrons, as your support gives me the freedom to only say yes to sponsors I actually really like. Thank you for watching, I'm Sam Bram, and have a great day.